Okay. I can't see how many people we've got signed in so far, but we'll give it a minute or so before we start, if that's okay. Okay, we've got 16 so far. I think we've got about 180 people registered for today, so we'll just give it a minute and start at perhaps 1 minute past 3. Once everyone's in.
Sounds like a plan. I've got my fingers crossed that we're not too far from each other, are we, in the UK, Annabelle? And there's a big storm supposedly in and about where we are at the moment. So I'm hoping it doesn't hit now.
Yes, I apologise in advance if I suddenly disappear because we are prone to power cuts. So if that happens, I'll scrabble back in using my phone and leave you to it.
We'll adapt, even if with no
We've
slide
got
up. We'll
Adam
just
there as well. Thank you, Adam, in
absolutely.
advance for holding us all together. So yeah, we're a bit thunderstormy at the moment. Okay, I think we're on 1 minute past, so let's kick off. I'd really like to welcome Paul Avery from BioStrata and Supreme Group on behalf of SAMPS, who's going to give us a cracking presentation about artificial intelligence for life science marketing. It's very much a beginner's guide. Paul has delivered this kind of thing before. We've got quite a large number of people attending the webinar this afternoon. So I think this is designed as a brilliant starter for one, and I'm sure Paul will very happily talk further to anyone who wants to hear a little bit more after the webinar. You can find him on LinkedIn, you can find him at BioStrata and Supreme. Before we get into Paul's presentation, I'd like to quickly tell you about SAMPS. If you can move to the next slide, Paul. So SAMPS is an organisation for sales and marketing professionals across the different scientific sectors. It's run entirely by volunteers. It's free to join. I think probably all of you have signed up as members because you're here on the webinar. But please tell your colleagues in sales and marketing about SAMPS because it could be that there are things that they could gain from the organisation as well. We do organise not just the webinars, but a series of events, both across Europe and in North America throughout the year. We've got a conference coming up in North America a bit later on this year in Q4, and there'll be one next year in Cambridge as well that we've got planned. So I'll tell you a little bit more about some up and coming webinars and so on at the end of Paul's presentation. But for now, I'll hand over to you, Paul.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Annabelle. Thank you also to Adam, who's been helping set this up, and the wider SAMPS team for having me today. And for all of you tuning in, as Annabelle mentioned, what we're planning to do today is to give it an intro to using AI for marketing and sales to a certain extent. And the reason we put together this particular session, and we've, as Annabelle alluded to, we've worked on a number of sessions over the last 2 years or so, is I think there's still a lot of us out there who haven't had much of a play with AI, who are hearing lots about it, want to get started with it, but there's a lot of sort of concerns floating around things like copyright and errors in the outputs and what can I use it for and all of that good stuff. So these are all really relevant concerns, and ultimately what we want to do today is to try and empower people and inspire people, honestly, to play with the tools and find their own use cases so that they can start saving time and also hopefully boost their own creativity and start doing new things and learning new things. If you have played with some of the AI tools before, like ChatGPT and like Midjourney, there's going to be some stuff in here for you as well, because as you'll see later, we're going to go through a bunch of applications that we've road tested here at BioStrata and Supreme Group that I think would be useful to most people, even if they're actually quite happy using the tools. Before we get too deep into that, who am I? Well, I'm a recovering scientist first and foremost, did a PhD in molecular biology many, many moons ago. And these days I'm VP of marketing at BioStrata and Supreme Group. where we all work together to help life science companies be successful, basically. But more importantly, for today's session, I'm also the co-host of the Artificially Intelligent Marketing podcast, where me and my friend Martin nerd out about AI every week or two about the latest things that we've seen. We've been on a summer hiatus, so if you go looking for episodes, you'll see we haven't had one since June, but excitingly, we're going to be bringing it back next week now that the summer is over. So in terms of today, basically two main aims as far as I'm concerned. I want to hopefully inspire you all to have new ideas about how you could use AI to do cool stuff that you don't do now. So in other words, I'm going to show you how I quickly create and learn new things and show you how easy it is for you to do it as well. And then the other thing is I want to help you all save time. At the moment, I estimate I'm saving about 8 to 12 hours per week using AI. And in a 40-hour work week, that's a significant time saving. And I suspect there's probably even greater opportunities there than I've plumbed. And I'm sure you will find your own opportunities. So that's kind of what we want to do. However, to really do that, it's about a mindset shift. AI is not like other software tools. And as much as there's a training element to today's presentation, it's about a mindset shift where you think, how can AI help me here? And being willing to play with the tools to test and learn, because nobody knows the full capabilities of these systems, honestly. They're too vast. It's a general purpose technology. And they're changing all the time. The tools are improving all the time. And something that ChatGPT or Claude or one of the other tools that we'll talk about today, something they were bad at 6 months ago, they might be brilliant at now. So you've got to be constantly testing and iterating. And this is also important because a lot of people's have experiences with some of these tools like ChatGPT over the last 12 to 18 months were with the free versions of the tools when they were based on GPT 3.5, which is quite an old model, and it kind of sucked. And they'd use the tool, the free version, the outputs would suck. They'd be like, this is wrong, this is badly written, this doesn't answer my question, these are all terrible ideas. And they'd say, right, AI can't work for me. But we've got new tools now that have been released in just the last few months that are significantly better and should get better results for everyone. So to try and get to that point of mindset shift, we're going to have to cover a number of different things today. The first is, what is AI and how does it work? And what I want to do here is just give you a bit of a primer into how these tools work, because I also think that gives you a feel for why they fail at certain things if you understand the why behind it. We're also going to look at some of the data that shows the impact of AI on productivity. Obviously, I'm an N=1 when I share my 8 to 12 hours a week, but I'm not alone. And as you'll see from data I'll share, there's lots of people who are getting benefits, and you can too. And then we're going to move on to those 10 AI applications that I hope will help you save time, improve the quality of your work, and boost your creativity. And some of them are so easy to get started with, you could start using them tomorrow or today, depending on what time zone you're in, I guess. And then finally, we're going to go through some general usage principles, because there are a few do's and don'ts and some things to be aware of to make sure that you are able to use the tools effectively, and that also you're armed with prompts and ideas to make sure that you can coach the tools to give you what you want, because in most cases, the first thing you get might not be the thing that you're after. And we'll dive a bit deeper into why that is a bit later. So with that in mind, first of all, what is AI? There are so many definitions for this. There have been over the years. There are even more now. But one of the ones that I really like is Demis Hassabis of Google DeepMind. Google, obviously, a massive player in this area, who very simply says it's the process of making machines smart, allowing computers to understand natural language, to be able to see objects like we see, to be able to think. And I think that's a really helpful way of looking at it. But another helpful way of looking at it is that artificial intelligence is basically about prediction. And it's about creating AI-driven tools that understand the world well enough to predict things that will happen in the future. And as we'll see in a moment, this is kind of how all the tools work. You give them some information, you ask for an output, and using prediction-based algorithms, they predict what the next word should be. They predict what image you want to see. So let's dive a bit deeper into that, because it's just interesting, and I think it helps explain some of the weaknesses, as I mentioned. So This is a bit of an oversimplification. Anybody who is in the machine learning field on this webinar is going to wince greatly at what I'm about to say, but I think it's a useful abstraction for marketers at least, and it's at the level that I can understand, because then it gets way too complicated for me, to be honest. And what it comes down to is there's kind of a series of steps. The first thing when you're training an AI model is you think about how that model's going to work, and then you go and get a bunch of data. So in the case of large language models like ChatGPT, it was all of the text on the internet and all of the text in publicly available books and probably a load of other stuff besides. Then you take all of that huge amounts, gigabytes, probably more than that of data, and you put them into the model and you run through initial training. And what the model does is it tries to understand all the patterns in the information it's been given. So if you give it 100,000 images of cats, it tries to figure out what it is that makes up a cat. If you give it all the pages on the web, it tries to understand what's the relationship between life science and marketing, and how do all of those things fit together. Once you've actually trained the model, it's kind of raw. So in all of those relationships between all the different bits of training data is raw, and you usually have to do what's called fine tuning. And you'll hear this a lot, and I think you'll hear it a lot in the future as well, because fine tuning is basically providing feedback to the model on the type of answers and outputs that you'd like it to give. And it can include giving it more information. So a good example of this would be if you wanted a ChatGPT that knew lots about your products and services, you might need to fine tune it on your products and services by giving it a ton of data specifically about those, which may not have been available in its original training data. Another thing that typically happens is something called reinforcement learning based on human feedback. So some poor folks have to sit down and rate outputs from models to say whether an output is good or not. And if you've used any of these tools, you may have even had this happen to you before, where a model shows you two answers and asks you which do you think is best. And this is RLHF. And then finally, when you've done all that, you deploy the model and people start using it. So to try and bring this to life, what does it really mean? Let's look at OpenAI's ChatGPT model. It's probably the most famous tool in the world in this area, and many of you have probably already used it or had a play with it. And so it's what's known as a large language model that's capable of natural language processing and has a contextual understanding. And what this means was, at least in the early days, it was trained on text. It understands human language and the things within human language, the concepts that emerge when you use language to explain things. And it can handle being given a bunch of information to assess. So, for example, you could give it an earnings call transcript from a company and ask it questions about it. And that transcript that you upload to it would be considered the context of the conversation. More recently, it's now multimodal in that it isn't just based on text, it's also based on understanding images and audio. So unfortunately, the whole thing gets a lot more complicated when you start to think about that. But this sort of primer is still useful, I think, within that context. But it's just worth knowing that soon you're going to be able to speak with ChatGPT and it's going to speak back to you, depending on what paid account. You may even have that this week. So there are extra capabilities. And then the way this kind of works is, like I said, it's a prediction model. So when Martin and I do forms of these presentations out as training materials working with companies, we'll often ask, like, what's the most popular food in Italy? What's the next word, do you think? And, you know, a decent chunk of people will say pasta. Some people will say pizza. You might get a bit of ice cream, but you won't get floppy, delicious, right? They're just low probabilities that that's the answer to that question. And when you then run this through OpenAI's tool, this gives you a screen grab. This is how the model's trying to predict what the next word should be based on the context of the conversation, which at this moment is just the most popular food in Italy is. So it's probability based. This is not like the software tools we're all used to learning, which are deterministic. They work based on if this, then that. They do the same thing every time. AI doesn't. It's probability based. That's why you can enter a prompt into ChatGPT and get one output, and then enter the same prompt and get a completely different output, because it's about probability. This is also why it sometimes makes mistakes. It doesn't deal in facts, it deals in probability. If we move on to images for a second, because this is kind of interesting as well, Midjourney is probably one of the most famous image generators out there. And it's based on something called diffusion models, which again are probability based, but they're kind of similar to text, but they work in a slightly different way. Midjourney is cool because you can generate really high quality images by giving a text prompt like, I don't know, a rabbit riding a motorcycle that's photorealistic. And you used to have to access this through something called Discord, but now it's got a new web interface. So if you've been waiting to play with Midjourney, it should be a lot easier for you all to use now. And the way these work is, again, it's a prediction model, but what they do is they get given a ton of images of labeled images of a thing, and then they deliberately noise the image. So you see from left to right here, the dog becomes noised. And then if you work back, once you have created that distribution model, you can then denoise based on a text prompt. So you can go from a bunch of noise and then you can create the picture of a dog. So again, this is very probability based. So that's why when you ask for a particular image, that's why it's so hard to control the images when you're using DALL-E 3 or Midjourney or any of these AI generation tools. They don't do exactly what you want because they don't know that there's a dog sat looking up, but they don't know necessarily if there's a ball in the background because it's just a noise of pixels to the models. And obviously they've got much better at giving us control of these things, but this is why it's not like using Adobe Photoshop, because it just works in a fundamentally different way. And I think once you understand how the models work, you can understand their limitations and why they are the way they are. So that's kind of the nerd bit. Hopefully that was interesting. I think it's important to know some of this stuff so that when it breaks, you know why it broke. In terms of how people are using the tools then, fundamentally, the most popular tool, as I mentioned, is ChatGPT. Most people are using it, as we'll see, for things like text generation to create blog posts and emails and other stuff. You can use it for brainstorming and critiquing content and a bunch of other things as well. But what's really interesting is there have actually been some studies trying to assess whether or not people who use tools like ChatGPT genuinely get any benefits. And in this study, at the end of last year, it was done with Boston Consulting Group, where they basically created two groups of consultants, both working on a fictional project. They worked on the same project, and they gave one group ChatGPT with no training, and the other group wasn't allowed to use ChatGPT. And as you can see, there was a significant increase in quality in the work of the team that had ChatGPT and were allowed to use it. Sorry, here's the data here. So you can see that shift to the right there in terms of the team that had access to ChatGPT. And when they dove a bit more into the detail, what they actually found was the biggest impact at that time was for, when you look at the distribution of skill levels in the team, it was actually the earlier stage consultants, the more junior consultants that maybe didn't have as much expertise and experience as some of their colleagues, that got the biggest boost out of having ChatGPT in their corner, helping answer their questions, create their content, conduct their analyses. Similarly, there was another study that looked at writing specifically, and looked at when people were given ChatGPT, how did it impact the writing work that they were doing? And in this case, we could see that the time taken to complete a project was reduced, and that the quality of the work increased. So you can see the green going down and the green line going up. And when they looked at the balance of work, what they found was that the biggest impact was the amount of time on the rough first draft massively reduced, and the amount of time people spent editing increased. And if you've been playing with these tools, you've probably had this experience yourself. And perhaps finally, just as interestingly, they also found that people had higher job satisfaction when they had access to ChatGPT and they could use AI. We've seen some recent studies that further accentuate this. Here's one that Ethan Mollick shared about a month ago on LinkedIn with 100,000 workers in Denmark who saw that they were able to significantly reduce the amount of time it took them to do tasks. And when they looked at the people who were mostly using the tools in this study, there we are, marketing right up at the top there in terms of people who were able to get the most benefit out of AI. Final bit of study work here is in the 2024 State of Marketing AI report that just came out from the Marketing Artificial Intelligence Institute. They looked at what people were looking to achieve with AI, and as you can see, it's absolutely things like reducing time spent on repetitive data-driven tasks, get more actionable insights, do things with less money, all of those good things. And when they looked at how people felt about using AI, there is actually a decent chunk of people who basically couldn't live without it now, and many people had infused it into their daily workflow. Now, their sample is a little bit biased, right? They're the Marketing Artificial Intelligence Institute. Who do you think subscribes to them? People who are interested in this stuff. So if you're in that don't use it at all, or still sort of experimenting phase, do not fear. I still think we're in early adoption here to a certain extent, and that's exactly what today is about. But we are starting to see people figure out how to use these tools to make a meaningful difference in the work that they're trying to do. And by the end of today, if you're not already in that camp, hopefully you will be. So, probably my favorite part of the talk. Let's talk about the different things we can do to actually save time and boost quality and creativity. So first thing I just want to highlight is most of what I'm going to talk about today is simple text-based applications in one form or another. So using ChatGPT and some other tools that I'll mention, because honestly, it's the easiest way to get started. But at this point, it is worth noting that you can use AI to generate images, to generate realistic looking video, to create code. You can create speech that sounds like actual people. There was an amazing set of use cases this week that Google released where you can basically upload an ebook and it turns it into a podcast between two hosts that's completely AI generated, but sounds completely human. So it's unbelievable. You can even create music. So there's loads of stuff to go out there and explore, but to keep it simple today, we'll focus mostly on ChatGPT. And when we're talking about text, there are a number of different models available. Some of them you may have heard of, some of them perhaps not. And what tends to happen is they have different strengths and weaknesses, and those strengths and weaknesses will change over time as the models improve. So I have to subscribe to Artificially Intelligent Marketing because we'll keep you on top of all of those changes. But for now, what you need to know is that ChatGPT is your sort of go-to for everything. Like it's pretty good at text creation. It's pretty good at answering questions. It's got a data analysis module, as you'll see in a moment, that allows you actually to analyze data. And they've just released a new advanced reasoning feature, which allows the tool to solve harder problems like what would be the steps I would need to go through to build the most amazing marketing plan? And rather than just giving you a short output, it will think about it for 30 seconds and give you a much more detailed, thoughtful plan. It is worth knowing about Anthropic's Claude. So if you go to claude.ai, that's where you'll find Claude, because this model, in my experience at least, is much, much better at creative writing. So if you're trying to create social posts or blog posts or emailers, you may find you get better results with Claude. It also has a really interesting tool called Claude Artifacts that we'll look at in a moment that's worth playing with. Finally, most tools that you're going to get exposed to, because if you're using ChatGPT, if you're a Microsoft customer, you've got Copilot and other tools baked into your system probably, but they're all based on the underlying architecture that's similar to ChatGPT. So a lot of the things that ChatGPT is good at is what also Microsoft Copilot's good at, although in general, Microsoft Copilot is a little bit weak compared to stock ChatGPT, and I find a lot of people complain about it. There was a new launch from Microsoft last week, which hopefully will make things a bit better. But if you're stuck using Copilot, I feel a bit sorry for you because it's not as good as some of these tools here. Hopefully it will get better soon. But ultimately, I still think it's worth having access to ChatGPT, even if you have tended to rely on Copilot, just because it has some of these tools like data analysis and advanced reasoning that haven't quite made it across into Microsoft's suite of tools yet. On the Google side, because obviously Copilot and Microsoft is handy because it's baked in, but it's just not as powerful. Google have a model called Gemini, which is baked in and easy to switch on if you have Google Workspace. This is really good. It's like not as good as Claude. It's not as good as ChatGPT, but it is pretty good. Its main advantage is that it's integrated with Gmail and Docs and Sheets and all of that stuff. The other thing it's really good for if you use the actual Google Gemini tool is it's got a massive context window. So I mentioned context is what allows you to upload information into these tools so that you can actually use them. And we'll look at some examples of that in a minute. but ChatGPT can handle, I don't know, about a book's worth of content, like 300-page book, which is still a lot. So you can give it a bunch of PDFs and it can analyze them all in one go. Claude is about the same, but Google's tool have about 5 times the context. So if you're working with really long, complex documents and you want to do complicated analysis of those documents, Google is probably the way to go. These tools are kind of released and kind of not. And if you're new to them, it can be a bit hard to work with to a certain extent. So I think it's one of those things to know that's there. Most people will be happy with 300 pages of PDF analysis and they won't need more. But I think it's important that you all know that those tools are there if you need them. Right, let's get into those applications. The first one, dictate, don't type. I save at least 2 to 4 hours a week and sometimes 8 hours a week by dictating instead of typing. I've always sucked at typing anyway. Now I'm even worse because I rarely ever do it. By using a number of different apps to help me. So the first one is Audio Pen, which is awesome. So it's an app that you can have on your phone or on your desktop. You speak to it, and then what it does is it takes your transcript and then it polishes the copy based on different presets so that it can write it as a professional email, or it can turn it into a blog post outline, or whatever preset you want to use. So gone are the days of creating a transcript where it gets a load of the words wrong and it kind of sells signs, you try and read the transcript and it's a mess. This cleans it up. So what I'll typically do is I'll play with the dog in the garden. I'll have my phone in my hand and I'll dictate a bunch of emails I know I need to send. And then when I get back to my computer, I just log into Audio Pen on my computer, and those transcripts have been polished up into beautiful writing, and I can just copy paste them into Gmail and send them. And there are integrations if you want to be really automated and automatically send them, you can do that. But I like to check the copy just to make sure that it got everything right and it's still in my voice, etc. But that saves me oodles of time. If you don't fancy Audio Pen, you can dictate directly into Word now. If you haven't seen this, in the top right-hand corner, there is a dictate button, and there's even a transcribe button. So if you do things like interview an SME to create a blog post, you can actually upload the transcript of that recording directly into Microsoft Word, which is pretty handy. The key thing here is if you've used dictation tools over the last 10 or 15 years, you know they suck, and that's why no one uses them. But they don't suck anymore. In fact, they're really quite good. And so if you haven't played with them for a while, you should. The other one I really like is voice in speech to text dictation, which needs a rebrand probably. And ultimately, this is a Chrome plugin that allows me to dictate straight into any app, because as much as I like Audio Pen's ability to polish my transcript or what I'm saying, in general, I tend to, you might disagree based on this webinar, but I tend to speak reasonably coherently, and I don't want to have to wait to get my transcript polished. I just want to speak directly into my email and hit send, and that's really helpful for that. I also recommend recording your meetings. There are a number of different tools. If you use Teams, it's built in. If you use Google Meet, it's built in. You can also get tools like Fathom, which is what we use at Supreme Group, which is awesome. And these are getting better all the time at pulling out the salient, important parts of your conversation, including key decisions, key actions. And of course, they record the call and they give you the transcript. This is a bit of a power move because it becomes useful later when you forget something and you want to go back. But also, what you can do is then start adding that information into LLMs. So for example, Teams and other tools will provide those summaries, and so will Fathom. But if you haven't got one of those tools, you can just paste your transcript and ask for a detailed summary. And you can see here another little top tip is to create prompts that you can reuse every time in some sort of prompt library. And in this case, I've got a master transcript summarizer, and I give the details of how I want every transcript to be. And then I always get a lovely polished transcript and beautiful notes and beautiful actions. You can also take this a step further. So for example, I'll often combine transcripts and documents to drive content production. So in this example, I let the AI know that I'm going to provide an RFP document and a transcript from an intro call. And then I want the tool to help me create my proposal based on example proposals that I give it. I can upload all of that information, sometimes not all in one go, because I don't want to overwhelm the tool. And it will actually help me draft sections of my proposal based on how I've written proposals in the past. And again, that saves me huge amounts of time. Another example would be to upload, this is a OpenAI ChatGPT screen grab, upload a brochure, messaging sheet, application note, and ask it to suggest ideas for blog posts. It's going to give you a bunch of ideas, and then you'll say, I really like idea 4. Can you give me an outline? And then it gives you the outline, maybe give it some feedback on the outline, and then ask for the draft. That works really, really well. And why do I love giving documents to these tools? Because a lot of the criticisms that people have, especially in the life sciences, is if you're writing about a topic that's not particularly prevalent in the training material, because maybe it's like really new, maybe ChatGPT or other tools don't know enough about it to write about it effectively. But this, in essence, is a version of fine-tuning. Just give it the information so that it has something to draw upon, and then it will help you reformat it and write in different things. So even as simple as giving it a blog post and asking it to write social posts to promote that blog post can work really well. And on that, you can also get creative. So one of my favorite things to do is to come up with a LinkedIn post. My LinkedIn posts are often not great and written quickly. So I'll try and get creative, and I'll try and get the tool to stimulate my creative juices. And I'll say, give me 3 different versions in different styles. And in this example, I asked for one that's in Seth Godin's style, Gary Vaynerchuk, and David Ogilvy. And what it does is, because there's a lot of content from those people on the web and in books, it's actually able to write as if it were them. But I could also ask for one that was in the style of, I don't know, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Pinocchio, and just start to get really creative and see what sort of interesting things I can get out of it. I'll also do a lot of brainstorming with the tool. So the idea for artificially intelligent marketing, when we created the podcast, we wanted to use AI for all of it. That was kind of our thing. So we used AI to come up with a name. And I really love this example because it's a great idea of where I think AI is for creativity at the moment, which is it says some interesting things, but it's not quite there. Artificially intelligent marketing is already a bit of a mouthful. You do not need the word minds on the end. But it gave Martin and I enough of an idea to go, do we want the AIM podcast? Would that be pretty cool? Yeah, okay, that will work. And that's a really good way to use the tool, is to, I still think human creativity trumps AI creativity at the moment. But if it's last thing on a Friday, or you're tired, or you're just like, oh, I just need to get over this blank page problem, these tools can really, really help you. Another way that I use the tools is to get them to do proofing and grammar checks for me on long emails, especially if it's a last thing on a Friday. They've got really, really good at spotting those errors. They weren't great 6 months ago, but now they're really much, much better at spotting all the issues and telling you what to fix, or they can even rewrite your email for you and fix all the errors for you if you want them to. They can also provide wider critique, which I really like. So this is a fictional example, but I'm writing an email to my boss about a sensitive subject. It's provided below. I want to be clear, concise, and fair, but I don't want to come across as overly direct or inflammatory. Please critique my email, provide feedback, and where needed, suggest alternative phrasing to help me improve my email. Similarly, if you're the type of person who actually tends to be quite fluffy and careful and overly sensitive, and actually you need to be a bit more direct with this person you're communicating with, you can flip it the other way, and all the other myriad of variations that you can imagine. So if you're struggling to phrase something the way you want, or you're nervous that you want basically a writing coach to help you with your work, this can be a really fantastic way to do it. We're going to move a little bit outside ChatGPT now, just because there are some tools that I use daily that I just think it's worth knowing about. So the first one is the Clip Drop Background Remover. So that's CLIPDROP. So Google that, and they have a bunch of free tools. You can use the paid version, and then you get more powerful tools, but the free version is perfectly good, to be honest. And my favorite one by a mile is the Remove Background tool. How many times as a marketer have you seen, I've got an icon in this brochure and I want to use it on the website, but I can't find the original icon, but the icon's got a background, so now I can't use it. I took a quick screen grab off the SAMPS website because I wanted the handshake icon, dropped it in remove background, it dropped the background out, and now I have the icon as a transparent PNG that I can use anywhere. I use this all the time. And I use it for logos, for icons, for tables, and a bunch of other stuff where I just want to be able to strip that background out. So I do tend to find that that is a really powerful use case and a quick and easy use case. If we also think about images, I do also tend to use ChatGPT, and some of the other tools are good as well because they've got vision. They can turn images into text. So as an example, this is a screen grab from our project management system. These are some BioStrata projects from a couple of years ago. And I can export these from the project management system, but our project management system kind of sucks when it comes to exporting stuff. So I just took a screen grab and dropped it into ChatGPT and told it, convert this image into a bullet list of text. As you can see in the image, there's a bunch of numbers that I don't need. So I said, ignore all the numbers. And there's a mixture of caps and all other stuff. And I just want sentence case. So I said that as well. Lo and behold, I get a lovely bullet list. All the text is fixed, the numbers are removed, and all the other things. So that's super handy as well. In moving into some slight power use cases for 9 and 10, one of the cool things about ChatGPT is it's got something called the data analysis module. And it basically uses Python in the background to be able to analyze data. So in one test, I exported a bunch of PPC data from a LinkedIn paid ad account. And then I started asking questions. I uploaded it into ChatGPT. I said, I'm going to give you some data for some LinkedIn paid ads. I want to analyze it with you. I'm going to ask you some questions. What do you think? So in this case, I asked if there was a correlation between total spend and click-through rate. And then it gave me this explanation, as you can see, which basically was that there was a weak correlation. It probably should be ignored, and that correlation doesn't imply causation, which for a lot of the ex-scientists on the call, I'm sure you're cheering. That's a very important thing for us marketers to remember as well. But just as importantly, I was like, this text is a bit too much for me. Can you graph this so I can see it visually? And then it graphs the data for me very quickly. And again, if you're a really good data analyst, you probably don't need to worry about this, but I'm not. And I don't have time to go into Excel and figure out how to get the right scatter plots or SPSS or some other tool. I'd rather just drop the CSV or the Excel file into ChatGPT and start asking questions about my data. The last thing, and I mentioned this a bit earlier, is play with Claude artifacts. Now, Claude artifacts is kind of awesome in that it creates this little window on the right-hand side of your chat window. So you start asking questions and integrating with the, having conversation with the chatbot like you would normally. But if you ask it to create stuff, it will actually create it for you on the right-hand side. So in this particular example, I asked, I'm a B2B marketer working in life sciences. I'm targeting these people, and I want to create an online calculator about total cost of ownership for my instrument. What should I include? So it gave me some things to include. Then it said, do you want me to build it? And I said, yeah, that'd be great. Please build it. So then it sort of tells me about how it's going to build it, and it goes ahead and builds it. I didn't like the first version. I was like, hey, do you know it'd be better if I could compare the old instrument in the new instrument? So then it built that for me. And as you can see, it outputs all the code. But in the preview, it shows you what the tool would look like if you embedded it on your website. So I start throwing in some dummy data of the old instrument and its hideous running costs, the competitor's instrument and its hideous running costs. And then I act as if I'm the customer putting in the running costs for our new instrument, which are much lower. But yes, you have got that initial outlay. And then I ask it to model it over 10 years. And then it shows me how much money I'm going to save and at what year I start to get my break-even point. And in theory, you could click publish, and then you could embed that calculator on your website. And for lots of us who wanted to do that, but didn't have the budget or the technical know-how or the development team, or it just wasn't worth the money investing in that tool, that video is near real time in terms of generation. It took me like 5 minutes. And it's mega cool. So loads of applications there. I think I noticed some pop-ups here, some chats about confidentiality is a really important question. So we're just going to, in the last 5 or 10 minutes or so, we're just going to look at some general usage principles for making use of these tools, because there are some really, really important things that you will need to know before you run off and start putting all your confidential information into the tools. As you might expect from that comment, absolutely data security is important. Hallucinations and fact checking, because these tools do make things up. the legal and IP aspects that you need to be aware of. I'm not a lawyer, but I can at least give you some guidance in terms of where most people seem to be on this at the moment, how important it is to avoid plagiarism, and a handful of quick prompting tips to help you get the most from working with ChatGPT. So the first thing is, in the early days, there were massive concerns about data security because it was never confirmed, but it was felt that a lot of the tools like OpenAI's tools and Google's tools were using any of the data that you entered to train their models. And there were a couple of security slip-ups where someone who logged into ChatGPT with their credentials was shown someone else's account and could see the confidential company information that those people had entered. Fundamentally, a lot of those things have been ironed out, and we just haven't heard any of those horror stories for maybe at least a year now in terms of people accidentally seeing other people's data. And in most cases, if you've got a paid account, your data is not being used to train the models. So my current advice on this is, if you are using the free versions, do not trust them. Do not give them anything proprietary. If you're using the paid versions, you can have a bit more confidence. And here you can see the paid options available with ChatGPT. My preference is Teams. You do need to have more than one person, and it is slightly more expensive, but your data is excluded from training by default, so you can feel much more confident in uploading your data to ChatGPT. And if you use the Plus account, you just need to make sure, and I'll show you this in a moment, that you go into settings and you opt out of having your data collected. It will mean you can't see your browsing history on a Plus account, but it's worth it, all right, to be able to have confidence that your data is being protected. In theory, Claude doesn't use anyone's data by default, but for me, I want to be using the paid accounts for all of these tools if I want to trust them. And ultimately, Copilot is built into huge amounts of places across the Microsoft ecosystem. Gemini's in the background, in the Google ecosystem. I find, to a certain extent, some of this concern about sharing our information a little bit interesting, because we've been sharing all of our information with Microsoft on SharePoint and Google Drive and AWS forever, and we trusted them. We trust Salesforce with all our data. So to a certain extent, my recommendation would be, if you're paying, you can probably trust them to input more sensitive data. Obviously, if you have an upcoming launch that will make or break your company, if that data leaks, take appropriate care. You must fact check the outputs of these AI. They make mistakes. In an early example from 18 months ago, I asked about 5 important papers in the discovery of stem cells. They all sounded super plausible, but this one isn't real. So the title's real, but the author and the date are wrong. And it's because of the probability nature of how these tools work. So they're good at answering some questions, but if you ask for specific quotes or you want specific papers and references, they're not going to be very good. So I wouldn't rely on them for that. And ultimately, everything you produce should be checked by an informed human. And if needed, you should do some extra due diligence to make sure that the information you're including is correct. The tools themselves are trying to help with this. Copilot now provides citations for certain amounts of information. Gemini, Google's tool, does the same. We're going to see something coming to ChatGPT soon, I think, through SearchGPT. So they are trying to improve this, and the hallucination rate has gone down. But I don't think I'd be doing my due diligence if I didn't say still check all the outputs. Another quick thing to keep in mind is about copyright and ownership. The key issue with copyright and ownership is, as it stands, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not an IP lawyer, I'm not a copyright lawyer, but what appears to be most people's feeling is that raw outputs from AI can't be copyrighted. If you create a blog post and you use AI as is, and you put it on your website and someone comes and steals it and puts it on their website, there's nothing you can do about it because you don't own the copyright. And it's the same for images. So it's very important from a copyright perspective to edit the outputs that you get. But it's also important because the quality is not always as high as you as the human might want it to be. And it might not be in your voice and all these other things. There's a lot of good reasons to to edit things, to be honest. The other thing I recommend doing is having an AI policy so that people understand what you can and can't do with AI in your business. And in fact, there is something called a GPT within ChatGPT, which is like a custom bot, which will help you build your AI policy if you want. And I recommend having a documented content production process that highlights where you will and won't use AI. And to do things like, if you get a raw output from ChatGPT, drop it in a Word document and track your changes on the edits, so that if you ever had to, you could show how much human intervention went into the content that you're creating. Another key issue that's kind of rare and not really very often an issue, but just something to be aware of, is plagiarism. So if you've got any doubt that the content you've produced might have been lifted from somewhere else, it shouldn't have been because of the probability nature of the models, but just in case, you can always run it through a plagiarism checker like Grammarly's. And that should probably cover you in most of the sort of high impact areas that you need to keep an eye on. So in the last 5 minutes, we're just going to go through some brief prompting techniques to help you get the best out of these tools, because if you ask a simple question, you'll get a simple and probably wrong answer. So you do need some tools in your arsenal to get the most out of the tools, because as we always say here at BioStrata, ChatGPT and many other AI tools, they're like an alien intern. They're extremely enthusiastic. They want to do loads of great work for you, but they don't really understand the world like humans do, so they'll often get things wrong or run off in completely the wrong direction. Perhaps the single most powerful thing that you can do is to use RICO. This is a prompting technique where you give the AI a role, you give it an instruction, you provide it with some context, and you tell it what you want the output to look like. So you can see an example on the screen here. I won't read it out. I'm sure you can all read that. But in essence, give it some information and be prescriptive about what you want. And if you don't quite get what you want, give it some constructive feedback so it can improve in the next iteration. And be prepared to go through 2, 3, 4, 5 iterations with the tool to get what you want. It's a conversation tool, not a one and done. If you've been putting single prompts, getting bad results and going, oh, this doesn't work, this is why. Use this, have a conversation with the tool and give it feedback. As part of this, you can improve your results even further if you actually give it some examples of what you want it to do. So if you have 10 subject lines for your business that you know have worked really well for your email marketing, give it to the tool and have it use those when it's coming up with new subject lines, because it will, in essence, use that to inform the ideas that it comes up with. And you can paste whole blog posts in here. You can give images. You can say, here's our brand guidelines, here's our tone of voice guidelines, and then it can use those to help drive its outputs. Another thing that we see work really well is be more. So when I'm trying to get it to be creative, it's still kind of safe. So I'm like, no, be more creative, and then I get an output. And I'm like, no, be more creative, and then I get an output. And if I do that 5 times, by the end, I've got something pretty hardcore. So be more scathing, be more happy, be more optimistic, be more whimsical can work really well. Another thing that tends to work quite well, although this isn't as important as it used to be, is think carefully before you answer. So in other words, you provide that RICO brief, and then at the end you write, think carefully before your answer, take me through your thinking. People tend to get better results when they do that. The other thing I always do when I am doing something fact-based, like I give it a call transcript and I ask for a summary, is I'll ask it to check its work. And if you think about its probabilistic nature, it needs to check its work to make sure that what it output to you is correct, because it's kind of like splurging it all in one go. And if you ask it to check it, it will usually find a lot of its errors. People have seen that you can stress it that these things are really important, and then it tries harder. I'm not sure that's so true anymore, but it's kind of an interesting little nuance. And sometimes it tells you that it can't do things that it can. And if you insist, then it will do it. So in this example, I was working on something and I asked it to output it as a PowerPoint presentation, and it said that it can't do it. And I was like, yeah, but you can do it. You've done it before. Please do it now. And then it just outputted the PowerPoint for me. So if it says no, give it a nudge. There are some really weird examples here that are probably not super relevant, but again, they tell you this is not normal software. One person managed to get LLMs to be better at math by convincing it was a Enterprise Starship captain. And again, that just tells you how weird these tools are. So be creative when you're trying to get the results that you're looking for. And then finally, I like to build prompt libraries, because if you're building Rico prompts all the time, they get long and they get complex. You don't want to have to type them every time. So there's loads of prompt library tools that you can find online so that you can keep a record of all those prompts and maybe even share them with your team. Right, so hopefully that was helpful. In terms of your next steps, I would highly recommend that you check with your IT and legal team if there are any restrictions or policies in existence on using these tools, because you may find that there are. And as much as I can give you some advice, I'm not a legal expert, and you should defer to your internal IT and legal teams. Get access to a paid account and turn off data sharing if needed, because that's how you can trust the tools much more with putting confidential information into them. ChatGPT is the best place to start, but if you're doing a lot of creative writing, you might consider Claude instead, or I would argue as well, because if you're saving 8 to 12 hours a week, I think you can probably afford to spend $40 a month on the tools, because the savings just vastly exceed the costs. And then, so I mentioned this earlier, but I just want to highlight that if you want to turn off data sharing from a Plus account, you go up to your settings in the top right. This is ChatGPT. You go to data controls and you turn off chat history and training. That's really, really important. Now, ensure that the ChatGPT is always open in your browser so you can get into that mindset of how can AI help me? And then this will help you start to build that muscle of leaning into the tools to get them to help you. Always edit the outputs for quality and copyright issues. And if you have any concerns at all, you can always contact me on LinkedIn, as Annabelle said, or pavery@biostratamarketing.com. And from there, all you need to do is start experimenting, because these tools are really about having a play. If you want to stay up to date on all the things that are happening in this area, you can subscribe to Artificially Intelligent Marketing Podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms. And with that, thank you for your attention, and I will happily take any questions.
Thank you, Paul. That was an amazing insight, and I'm sure everyone's taking away lots of useful stuff. There are some questions here. I think you've answered the one about the confidentiality. Your recommendations about using the paid platforms, I think is brilliant. What's the best AI tool for marketers that most of us haven't heard about yet?
Oh, that's a good one. I think it's Notebook LM from Google. That's the one where if you can give it a URL to your blog post or your ebook, it will create a podcast about your piece of content, and it sounds like a real podcast. That's kind of awesome.
Okay.
And HeyGen for video. So if you're interested in synthetic video, try HeyGen, HEYGEN. Great question.
Brilliant. Claude Artifacts, is that paid for? So that is one of the paid ones, isn't it, that you talked about?
You can use Claude for free, and you can use Artifacts for free. So you can have a play with all of these tools for free, but they're limited. So you'll do 5 or 6 messages with Claude Artifacts, and then it will tell you you've used up your allowance and you have to wait 4 hours. So if you really want to have a proper play, you need to pay, but you can test them all for free.
Brilliant. There have been 1 or 2 questions about, can we get the slide deck? And the answer to that is yes, definitely. It will be uploaded onto the SAMPS website in the not too distant future. So don't worry about that. All this will be there for you to refer back to. A question here from Shannon Greg. Are you seeing companies in the life sciences more open to using AI than when it was first launched?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think there is a bring your own AI trend that's similar to bring your own device trend when we all started using our mobile phones and bits and pieces for work. I think there are people who are using AI in their organizations, but their bosses don't necessarily know. And if I was a leader of a marketing team, I would want to get ahead of that, get a policy in place, train people on the tools and make sure we're using them effectively so that people are not just using their free ChatGPT account on their phone, chucking in a load of confidential data into the free tools. I'd want to get ahead of that and help my team use those tools. Training is critical. Some of this will hopefully have helped. This is an abbreviated version of a workshop that usually takes about 4 hours, as you can probably tell from the speed of how quickly I spoke. It's one of those webinars where you won't watch it on 1.5 times, you'll watch it on 0.5 times. But yeah, I think we're now over the tipping point where more and more people are using these.
Great. One question I think might be a little bit tongue in cheek, but how can AI help with cold calling?
So there are actually voice synthesis tools that have been created that can speak like a human, and there are a number of them that are imminent for being baked into tools we use every day, like Salesforce. I personally hope that they are not adopted, because we all get cold called enough as it is on the phone, and I don't really want an AI ringing me up. If a human can't even be bothered to cold call me, we're in a really dangerous time. I think where there's an interesting gap is structured outbound that uses deep data insights to auto-populate emails that are really customized based on a prospect's requirements, challenges, and everything we know about their business, to do high quality outbound at scale. But the person to speak to about this is probably Harrison Wade, because I know he plays a lot with these tools. So if you're interested in that, maybe even Harrison's on the webinar and ask the question. But if it wasn't Harrison, you should speak to him, because he knows a lot about that.
Okay. So one question, I think we've got time for a couple more, and then I'm going to come back to Harrison, actually. Lots of AI tools out there. What would you recommend people would really equip themselves with in terms of, you know, using on a pretty regular basis? If they were maybe applying for a new job or something, you know, what should people get proficient in?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think for me, it starts with ChatGPT and just getting used to playing with it, because it won't give you what you want every time. You have to learn how to interact with the tool. You have to spend time with it. You have to come up with use cases. And I think that most organizations are going to adopt Gemini, Copilot, or ChatGPT at scale, and they all kind of function the same way with a lot of the same limitations. So you could kind of choose any of those, but my preference is ChatGPT because it's got a bit of extra power, like data analysis.
Okay, fantastic. That's probably answered the next question about what would you recommend for life sciences marketing freelancers? What would be the most useful thing for them, do you think?
I guess it depends on what the domain they operate in. But if I was, for example, a content creator, I would be looking at how I could better scale the work I was doing for clients, but without compromising on quality. And that last bit is absolutely critical. And I'll be clear, BioStrata does not use ChatGPT to produce client content. For us, the tools are not quite high enough yet. It's fine to add an SME transcript and some other materials from the client, and maybe come up with different ideas for outlines for an application note or a blog post. But when it comes to actually writing them in a really effective way, I think us humans, both freelancers, agencies, internal folk, I still think we're a lot better than the tools. But we might get GPT-5 next year, you know, early next year, and that may change. But as it stands, you know, systematize the drudgery, like record calls, get the transcripts, get early ideas for an outline, then take that and use your talent to bring it to life in a way that only you can, would be my suggestion.
Brilliant. Thank you. And just one final question. Do any of these AI tools cite their sources when they write blog posts and other things?
There are some tools that have been specifically developed for content creators. I've yet to find one that works very well. Like there's tools like Writer and Hyperwrite, and they're kind of okay. But for just a general purpose tool, I can't get away from using ChatGPT. And at the moment, there's no tool that I know of that will produce a high quality output, certainly in the life sciences, but not even like to write a blog about how to create great landing pages, that will give you a really nice output with 12 hyperlinks into relevant content. Like it just hasn't, people haven't been able to build good tools in that area from what I've seen so far.
Yeah, thank you. So just before we leave then, firstly, a massive thank you, Paul. That's just been a fantastic presentation, really insightful, really helpful, and loads of actionable insights, I think, for everybody who's been on the webinar. And please do share this webinar with your colleagues. If they sign up for SAMPS membership, they'll be able to access it, you know, as long as they want in the future. And I think that this is going to be a spot that we'll pull you back to, Paul, perhaps 12 months from now for the next update. Just before everybody goes, just one or two things from SAMPS. Going back to Paul's mention of Harrison, if you want to talk to Harrison about how he's using AI and other things, then please come and join us on Wednesday next week in the Docklands. I think many of you will be going to LRIG, Drug Discovery 2024, and we've got a networking event that evening on the site at Excel as well. I'll be just giving you some quick tips around how to turn leads into customers. Harrison's going to talk about that from a sales point of view. And Lee from AZO Network is going to be talking about how to turn unknown visitors who visited your booth potentially that day into leads. So it's free to attend if you're a SAMPS member. Otherwise, there's a small fee. So do please come and join us. We've also got another SAMPS webinar coming up next month on talent in transition, about getting hired and hiring people in the life sciences, which is going to be led by Mark. So do please sign up for that webinar as well. And again, very easy to do so on the website. And I'd also like to mention the North American conference we've got coming up at the beginning of December, December 4th to the 5th. There's a networking evening in advance of the conference, which is during the day on the 5th of December. It's fantastic that we've got Hamid Ganadan as our keynote speaker for that, who's the CEO of the Linus Group. Again, you can register for that on the SAMPS website. If you can do it before the end of September, you'll take advantage of the early bird registration as well, so the fee will be slightly reduced. So if it's something that you can do quickly, then please do so. I think that's it from all of us. Timing wise, we're pretty much bang on the hour. Thank you all for attending, and we look forward to next year, Paul.
Good stuff. Thank you for having me. Thanks for your attention, everyone. And like I said, do reach out to me if you've got any questions.
Many thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Annabelle.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.